Welcome to the Neuromodulation Podcast, presented to you by the International Neuromodulation Society. Dive into the forefront of today's emerging neuromodulation techniques, insights, and ethical and clinical applications. Subscribe now to join the multidisciplinary collaboration of medical care providers, scientists, and engineers who are part of the global conversation that's shaping the future of healthcare.
Welcome to our INS podcast. The topic today is 30 years of intrathecal therapy, what has changed and what remains the same. My guest is my colleague, proud to say my mentor in the field when I first started, Professor Jean-Pierre. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So could you tell us where you're currently working?
Well, I'm Belgian and I worked since about 42 years in the same hospital, a private hospital in Belgium, and I'm an anesthesiologist, first doing both, anesthesia like it was in that time, and now since about 20 years full-time pain management. So we are running a big pain center now with about 22,000 patient contacts per year, and we see everything actually. We are mostly specialized in neuromodulation therapies, interventional pain management, and with a special interest in neuromodulation therapies.
So you've had the opportunity to actually have a front row seat at neuromodulation as it has changed over time. Could I ask you just to tell us, what was it like when you first arrived at your first exposure to the pain clinic?
Well, when I was a trainee in anesthesia, I was already interested in pain management. And to be honest, my professor gave us the opportunity to do something interesting at the end of our training. And everyone, last year could have a choice. And I said, I want to do pain management. He said to me, okay, but there's no future in that. So you see, that was the mentality at that time. I speak about 1984 or something like that. And okay, my first steps were at the University of Ghent, where at that time, which is close to where I live, at that time there was one guy who was interested in pain, and he already started with spinal cord stimulation. Okay, it was the very first beginning. It was like unique. You had two university centers who started doing spinal cord stimulation and a little bit of intrathecal drug delivery. At that time, it was absolutely not a widespread therapy at that time.
How were the patients managed back at that time?
Yeah, well, it was very, let's say, we were pioneering, if you want. We did a lot of minimal invasive procedures like epidurals and so. And it was actually the time where we just started to use fluoroscopy, for example, where it was not blinded anymore. Right. We did a fluoroscopic approach for putting us an epidural, and colleagues were looking at us with, what is he doing? What does he need? And there were the studies where they saw that if you have you want to do a L4, L5 injection, that in 50% of the cases you were at the wrong level. And that was the reason why we started using imaging techniques. That was a great step forwards, I think. We had, of course, other pioneers in radiofrequency, like Menno Sluiter in the Netherlands, and so at that time I went to see him. He came to our center, and we were actually self-training us at that time. There was no dedicated training in pain management.
Yeah, so learn on the job.
Yeah, learn on the job, and by traveling and seeing what people are doing elsewhere.
Did the patients seem similar to the patients today, or were they different in terms of where they were on their pain continuum?
Of course, now we have much more possibilities, and we are treating much more complicated cases. And also for example, surgery evaluated. At that time, back surgery was not so frequent as they do now, not so complicated, not so extensive. All these are lumbar procedures, screwing, etc. It was not like that at that time. So we had, I think, less failed back surgery patients at that time.
When was your first exposure to intrathecal therapy in the clinic?
Well, I went to the south of France. It was a big neurosurgical center, and there was an anesthesiologist doing intrathecal therapy for cancer pain. I read that in journals, and I decided to go there for 3 months, and I learned intrathecal therapy there. But at that time, there were no implantable pumps. It was with external devices, like a Portacat system, a little port you implanted, and you had an external needle and an external pump. Of course, that was not meant for non-cancer patients, of course. You cannot work or travel with that. And there was a high risk of infection.
So I'm thinking back to that time and, the pioneering work of Tony Yaksh actually discovering the opioid receptor on the spinal cord, Elliot Crames and his first case reports of using intrathecal therapy for both cancer pain and then chronic non-cancer pain. There was no textbook.
No.
Back then.
Now there is a big one. Huh?
Now there is a big one. So how did you find your way?
Yeah, well, there was some literature on that, and it was, we had even a guy in Belgium who injected aspirin intrathecally. And I said, what is he doing? So it was very experimental, all these things at that time, and we didn't know how much we had to give, and so it was much more experimental, I remember treating, for example, a cancer pain, orofacial cancer, awful case, with a neurosurgeon who put a catheter intracerebroventricular, and we were injecting every day sufentanil there. Sufentanil was even not registered, it was a R number medication, but the guy was completely pain-free. So we saw very good results in putting opioids in the central nervous system. And then, the pumps, the implantable pumps came, and that was actually a revolution in the good sense.
How were the pump patients managed in the pain clinic when the implantable pump was available?
First, it was even not reimbursed because people didn't know. We did like we do now, but we tested also with external pumps, trying to mimic the internal pumps and to see if it was worth to implant an expensive drug release system, which was not reimbursed at that time. And I have the impression that we were giving too high doses at that time.
Long term, what were the kind of results like for those patients?
Actually, we still use a lot of intrathecal drug delivery systems now, and even we see a raise in the number of patients we do. Because of, we have the cancer pain patients who survive much longer than they survived before due to adequate chemotherapy and pharmacotherapy. But they have then, they still have the complications of pain, and so they need quite pain relief. We also see that opioids, oral opioids, transdermal opioids, etc., it doesn't work. And it gives too many side effects. We all know the problems with OxyContin all over the world. So we never give that. So we have a lot of patients with refractory pain problems, not suitable, for example, for spinal cord stimulation or failed spinal cord stimulation. We implant them with an intrathecal drug delivery system, and we never use WHO3 drugs, never. It's forbidden in my center. Right. OxyContin is forbidden in my center, fentanyl is forbidden in my center because we see that it doesn't work and it interferes with our intrathecal drug delivery system. So there is a zero tolerance before implant of an intrathecal drug delivery. That leads us to use microdosing. Instead of giving milligrams, we give micrograms now. And so we have much less side effects. So we start with 50 to 100 micrograms of morphine per day intrathecally in an opioid-naive patient. Yeah. So we have detox programs for these patients, and we see that it's a huge difference.
And you would typically go up to a maximum dose, a ceiling dose would be what in terms of morphine?
Morphine, 2 milligrams a day, something like that. But we also use other drugs, of course. We sometimes see side effects because of the morphine, like edema, for example. And if you switch to a more lipophilic drug, like sufentanil, it's spectacular. So we have a lot of patients now on intrathecal sufentanil.
Right. And I guess when you were using high doses, and it wouldn't have been just yourself, it was the entire clinical practice at the time, to be using sort of, instead of 0.1 to 2 milligrams, often 2 milligrams to 20 milligrams. What were the kind of complications you were seeing back in the day with 10 milligrams plus of intrathecal?
For example, endocrine consequences. We were the first actually to publish that. Hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, hypocorticism. All the male patients, they told us in the clinic, you know what, I have a problem because I'm impotent since I have this. So we started analyzing that, and we saw that there was a huge drop in testosterone in these patients. Okay, reversible, or you can give substitution, but we didn't know, and so that was due to the high doses of intrathecal opioids at that time. So it's now much better than before with this microdosing, which allows us to apply this therapy more frequently.
Yes, I still have that original paper in my library at home. I've never thrown it out. I don't know why, but I've always kept it. So, I mean, you know, when I was training, I was kind of taught by my mentors in Australia, you use spinal cord stimulation for refractory leg pain, you use intrathecal pump for refractory back pain. That was kind of the mantra that we were taught. But obviously spinal cord stimulation itself has evolved. So how have you seen the advances in spinal cord stimulation change the way intrathecal therapy has been used over the years?
Yeah, so like you said, we had like purely neuropathic pain, okay, spinal cord stimulation, purely mechanical low back pain, intrathecal drug delivery system. Nowadays it's changed. So we can try in the algorithm, even in these refractory low back pain patients, we will try spinal cord stimulation with the new waveforms, DTM, whatever, HF10 and so on, before we go to intrathecal drug delivery. It's absolutely like that, yeah. But of course, by combining medication and the pump, we can also have good results on neuropathic pain with the pump, adding, for example, small doses of baclofen, local anesthetics, clonidine, and making mixtures. So it can also have a good effect on the mixed neuropathic, nociceptive, nociplastic pain problems.
I think also, when I think back to the patients who came in with their intrathecal pump, they were often end of the road, end of the line patients in wheelchairs and so forth. So we kind of, thinking back, we never really applied a lot of rehabilitation to them after their pump went in. Not in the 1990s, we didn't. But that's maybe changed a bit now. What do you feel is the role of rehabilitation after a pump has gone in?
It's key. That's also the evolution in pain centers, and we evaluated from like a single specialty pain center to a multidisciplinary pain center all over the world. And now we are working close together with the rehabilitation center, and we make like a plan. You will have, okay, you have pain, so you cannot move, or it's difficult to move, so we will help you for your pain. But that's A. Then you go to B. That's the rehabilitation. And of course, especially in younger patients, not everyone can do that, but in the case of younger patients, it's really part of the therapy, certainly, very important, yes. But we are now, because we have microdosing, less side effects and endocrine side effects, for example, we implant younger patients as well, and they can go to the rehabilitation center. Same for spinal cord stimulation. Yeah. They need to go to a rehabilitation procedure.
Who do you see are the current ideal candidates for intrathecal therapy?
Refractory pain, whatever it may be, pain that spreads all over the body because of degenerative spine problems, cervical as well as thoracic and lumbar, of course cancer pain, spasticity, but of course then it's baclofen, but also it can be a combination of morphine and baclofen as well. Dystonia in extreme CRPS patients. You can use intrathecal baclofen, it helps. Together with, for example, DRGs, you can combine neurostimulation with intrathecal drug delivery. I have patients with CRPS and they have a DRG stimulator, but on top they have an intrathecal drug delivery with baclofen. Mostly temporary. You will be able to explant the pump after 2 or 3 years and keep the neurostimulator in place. So we have much more possibilities. It's not only or, it can be and. That's also a good message, I think.
Is there still a role for trialing intrathecal therapy before implant, or has it got to the point where that doesn't really have a role to play?
Yeah, well, we just had a debate on trial stimulation, trial or not. Yes, I think it makes sense to do a trial stimulation, but it's difficult in practice to do. How do you do that? You have to use a port, you take a grabber needle, you put it in the port, and you have an external pump. Then the problem is that external pump does not exactly the same than your implanted pump. It's not a roller pump, it gives little shots. If you have a Pharmacia Deltec pump, for example, you have a bigger volume, so high volume, low concentration works better than high concentration, low volume. So you are not exactly in the same conditions. And then we made an agreement with the provider that we are implanting, do an all-in-one procedure, And it's a kind of no cure, no pay, because the number of negative trials is very low. Finally, you have the advantages of trialing, but it has a lot of disadvantages. And finally, maybe it's better to do an all-in-one procedure, I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If spinal cord stimulation has obviously advanced over the last 30 years, why do you feel that perhaps intrathecal therapy hasn't gone through the same rate of progress of advancement?
One, there is only one provider, practically, so there is no competition. So there is no drive to improve the technology. Yeah? I have a lot of ideas how you could improve the technology of an intrathecal pump. So if there is stagnation in technology, then there is also stagnation in the therapy. We have now more possibilities because of using more drugs. That's advanced compared to before, I think. And also the idea of zero tolerance, the microdosing, etc. The results are better than before, and we have less complications. What also is against pumps is that you need an organized service for the management and the follow-up of patients with intrathecal drug delivery. And that's a bit, centers say, no, we don't do pumps. Yeah. You have to do pumps. If you're a pain clinic, you have to offer everything from a simple epidural to an intrathecal drug delivery, but you have to be organized. I always tell my fellows, with a spinal cord stimulator, you cannot kill a patient, but with a pump, you can kill a patient. So we very careful. So we have, for example, a dedicated consultation. It's every Monday morning. We only see pain patients, and we refill the patients during that clinic. Other days we don't refill pumps. So the attention of everyone is to program, reprogram, do the refill, look at the prescriptions, etc., etc. It's a whole system, and it's like a train that works perfectly, but you have to pay attention. We don't want errors in programming, for example.
Yeah. And do you think that, given that there's only FDA approval is for morphine and ziconotide, do you feel that the lack of novel drug options has hampered the therapy?
Yeah, I think there should be more research in other molecules to use intrathecally. Yeah, you have ziconotide, but it's so expensive. For example, we don't have access to ziconotide in Belgium. And it's a complicated drug.
Indeed. I was involved in the early ziconotide trials, and we saw some interesting side effects. Yeah. Obviously, because the volume is less than perhaps it was historically, at least compared to spinal cord stimulation, how can trainees go about trying to get adequate exposure and training in the field of intrathecal therapy?
Yeah, training in interventional pain management is key. Complications you have in spinal cord stimulation is due to the lack of education. So fellows are not enough exposed to these procedures. So I think nationally in different countries, universities have to organize a curriculum, and once you're allowed to do these procedures, you're supposed to have followed fellowship in interventional pain management. We have every year at least two residents that are just coming for these procedures, and it's like in surgery. Young fellows are not enough exposed during their basic training to the interventions they have to do later on, I think. Fellowship, I think, if they want to do these procedures. Very important, I think.
Entirely agree with that. A difficult question, one that I don't think any of us truly know the answer to, but what do you think the future holds for intrathecal therapy? Will it still be here in 20 years' time?
Yeah, sure. The cancer patients, for example, we see an increased number in cancer patients, but you see also an increase in life expectancy of these patients with mostly residual pain due to bone metastasis, etc., etc. And then you have also the complications of chemotherapy. So we should more be able to implant for cancer pain. For example, in Belgium, we can implant pumps, but not for cancer pain. which is completely stupid. But we are fighting now to have also reimbursement. We have enough arguments to go to the national insurance company and say, hey, listen, life expectancy, etc., we should have reimbursement for intrathecal drug delivery. Once we start that, we will have a tremendously raise in intrathecal drug delivery systems. That will maybe also, I had a discussion with Janssen, the pharmaceutical company, which is a Belgian company, and because of the fentanyl. So fentanyl is only available in a concentration of maximum 50 micrograms per ml, yeah? And the patient needs between 50 and 100 per day. That's 1 or 2 mLs per day, so we have very frequent refills. And I was discussing several times and asking, can you give it, in powder or something? And why, market is too small, we're not interested, it costs money. No. If the market is bigger, they will be more motivated to do things like that, which is logic. And then, of course, the hardware, the pump itself, there could be a lot of improvements in the design of the pump, which make it more or less invasive, more comfortable for the patients.
Yes, I sometimes think, well, if I took every single advance that I've heard of in the field of neuromodulation and tried to apply it to a pump, you would have this fantasy pump where it sampled the local CSF, looked for inflammatory peptides, analysed their level, then closed loop. It then pumped out what was required for both analgesia and restoration of elimination of neuroinflammation, and did so in a closed loop fashion. That's where I'd like to see things. I know that's pie in the sky, but I guess what we should say is we shouldn't necessarily accept that things have to be where they are now, that there is the possibility of improving things in the future if we desire it and want to push towards that goal.
Yeah, you mean that instead of purely treating the pain, you will also treat the cause of the pain.
Central sensitization and so forth. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. Maybe to finish, ask you this question. We've certainly seen there was a famous paper that came out many years ago now showing that patients in a randomized trial to intrathecal therapy and oral therapy, the cancer patients lived on average 3 months longer, simply from having intrathecal therapy, the lack of immunosuppression from high-dose oral opioids. Why do you feel that overall perhaps the ability of cancer patients to get this treatment isn't as large as it could be?
I think all because of, not many pain clinics are organized to do intrathecal pump. So because they're a bit afraid of the complexity of the follow-up of these patients. So if the therapy is not available, the oncologist will not refer patients. So the patients will come from the oncology, and if the therapy is available and if the therapy improves and the drugs are improving, you will have a massive number of patients suitable for that. Again, we see patients on 120, 150 micrograms of fentanyl, then the oncologist, they call, this patient, you put an intrathecal catheter, you give them 1 milligram intrathecal, because we will not detox the cancer patients, of course. But you give them 1 milligram intrathecal, they're completely pain-free. Why should you wait until they need these massive high doses of systemic opioids, which don't work? We know that it doesn't work, or it works for
Period of time.
It's short period of time.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you need to really be thinking about ecosystem of capacity for service delivery inside your unit, but also an ecosystem of interacting with an oncology team and them understanding what can be done in the clinic and the clinic understanding their needs. And so it's about an ecosystem response to get the best results.
Yeah, we can go as far as that every big department, oncological department, should be in relation with the pain center being able to do intrathecal drug delivery systems. It's a one service. Like we do multidisciplinary in pain centers, we should also include the oncology department.
I think that's very wise words of wisdom from an extensive career in the field. Professor Van Buyten, thank you so much for today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.